a new project as well. So, our new project is called Space Part 2. And I know that we took a look at it last time, but I want to review some basic things for the project before we move forward. So, number one, the concept for this project is a lot more like free. It's more open to what you would kind of like to do for the most part. Up until this point, we've been reviewing a lot of basic skills in Photoshop, and I've just kind of told you exactly what you more or less have to do. For this project, I want you to take all of those things we've been practicing and put them into one. Okay, today we are going to practice some layer masking as well. I know most people with layer masking, but there are a lot of little things you can do in Photoshop to make your workflow quicker and less stressful and less tedious in general. And since this requires a lot of layering of photographs, I want to make sure that we go back over some of those things. Some of you, if you haven't had level 1 in a couple of years, it's actually vastly improved what you can do with layer masking in Photoshop. Some of you may have also noticed on Canvas, there is a little quiz over layer masking. You don't have to take it this second. I'm going to review all this stuff with you today. At the end of class, take it if you haven't already. I know a couple of you went ahead and took it early because, I don't know, you're studious as human beings, I suppose. Okay, but we are going to go over those things. Now, a couple of other just like general announcements. I know a lot of you in here have had the topic of senior parking info come up several times this year. What they shared with us as teachers, I pasted on a page in here. If that is relevant to you, that's all I got. But it has the links to what you're supposed to do to sign up for that now that that's finally open. You have until tomorrow to sign up for that if that is something you want to do. I also posted, just in case you want it, like an actual visual image of your new bell schedule. Okay, it's just a screenshot. It's nothing fancy, but if you want to have a picture of it, it's there for you. It's the same one we've had for a few weeks, the bell schedule. I just never posted a picture of it. Okay, so couple of things that I need to make sure everybody in 2D design does today. If you have not completed a sketch and found your reference images, that needs to be the first priority of today. You need to do that first. Okay, if you've got your reference images, we're going to begin building. Now, I know a lot of the really good photo, like free stock sites, are blocked here at school. Okay, if you do have home Wi-Fi, you should be able to go to websites like Pexels.com is a really good one. It's like pixels, but with an E. And you can find all kinds of photos, and they're all free. Okay, I think there is maybe a download limit, but like it's pretty reasonable per day. That's a good one if you're not finding what you want that you can look at home. Here at school, one that used to be unblocked, I'm not sure why they blocked it, but here at school, one that is still unblocked is called Unsplash. Okay, and it has a lot of high res photos. Now, you don't have to find your pictures on a website like this, but if you do, it's going to be guaranteed that they are a larger, higher quality. If you use Google because there's something in mind that you're looking for that you can't find elsewhere, please just make sure. So say, I don't know, say that you're looking for a very specific place on the planet that you want to use. Okay. Make sure that when you go to Google Images, go up to Tools, and just for like your own sake, make sure you choose a size that's large. Okay. And don't use anything with watermarks. We want to keep it nice and classy and as professional looking as you can. But as a few like reminders of the general concepts for this project, you are going to create a landscape. Your landscape can be any type of landscape. So it doesn't have to be a scenic, like national park kind of view of water, mountains, just majestic earth. It can be space or apocalyptic or futuristic if you want to take a sort of sci-fi or fantasy edge to it. It can be a cityscape. A landscape is, in general, is just a picture of land, typically from a distance. You are going to be required to combine at least 3 different pictures of land, of like the environment together to make your landscape. And then you're also required to add some 3D forms into it. And your 3D forms can be any kind of forms you want. They can be rectangles, spheres, they can be diamonds, whatever you like. But in order for them to look 3D, they are going to need to use some of those illusions of space that we talked about. And there's a lot of different ways that you can choose to make your forms look. They can reflect things, like over there on the right. Okay, they can have things inside of the forms, kind of like the one on the left of the screen. They can be solid with some shading. It's up to you. Okay, you can interpret it how you choose. I do recommend, just to create extra points of interest, that you find a few small things you can throw in your landscape, like people, animals, maybe like a signature tree or a building or a car, something small that gives your piece a sense of scale so that we understand how large that environment actually is compared to everything else that's going on. But the general color scheme you want, the general like time period theme, realism versus fantasy is up to you. Okay. You do need to have, again, though, minimum of 3 landscape photos, and they need to be big, high quality photos. And you need some geometric forms that appear to be 3D. Okay. We're going to do things like blending. I want you to think about lighting, shading, reflection. You do need to do some color correction, and I'll talk to you about that in just a few minutes. But you want to pick out pictures, if you haven't already, that have a similar perspective. And what I mean by perspective is, imagine you are like looking out at that landscape. So when you look at the photo, it's like what you were seeing with your eyes. When you select your photo, everything needs to feel like it's on the same level or at the same plane, if that makes sense. So if you have something that's looking straight out and you can see a wide area, you don't want to pick a second photo that looks like it's an aerial shot from above. You're not going to be able to mesh them together. You want to imagine that your photographer is looking sort of in the same direction of each of the landscape photos that you choose to help give a more realistic sense of perspective. And again, you could choose to represent and build any kind of landscape you want. How you want to build it, what you want to put in it is up to you, as long as it meets the other basic requirements. I do want you to do a really loose sketch. I want you to think about the colors that you want to use, but before you do either one of those things, I really encourage you to find your reference images if you haven't already, because a lot of times that's what holds you back on an idea. Sometimes you simply can't find the right image for what you want to do. So I do want to show you a few things. Okay, you have 3 different size options, by the way. I forgot to read those out for this project. You can do a square, 10 by 10 inches. You can do 11 by 14 or 9 by 14. So whatever you think kind of fits your particular design, your idea best. A 9 by 14 is going to be narrow, so you can make it really wide and short, or you can make it really tall and thin. An 11 by 14 is more kind of like a standard sort of poster, and you could turn it either landscape or vertical, like portrait style. And then, of course, a square is a square. Okay, but in Photoshop, I've grabbed a bunch of photos, and most of mine are from Unsplash. Okay, but I just want to show you a few of the ones that I'm kind of working with. Okay, so I kind of wanted to use these old buildings. These are from a site in Petra, Jordan. It's been around for a long time. Both of these are the same building. The trick is trying to find, even if you're going to like repeat images of things that seem like they are taken from the same angle. So like these two here, taken from very different angles. Sometimes you can make that work for your perspective. You can put them in the landscape in a way that it still translates and feels realistic, but other times you can't. And it's perfectly fine. I found a bunch of pictures that just have random stuff in them that I found kind of interesting, like these camels. Okay. These camels don't have anything to do with anything else, but I'm going to cut them out and just add them into the scene. So I tried to find perspectives that were kind of similar. Like I have several shots that are from really far away, but they seem like they're kind of at the same eye level, if that makes sense. And that's going to make the whole perspective aspect of faking this entire like fake landscape a little bit easier. Okay. Now, as far as masking goes, and I have a bunch of things that I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do with, I do always recommend find more images. It's always better to have too much and have to kind of narrow your choices down than to start with not enough things from the very beginning. Okay. But I'm going to start with the thing that I know I want to include. I know I want to include, not that one, this building. Okay. Now I don't want all this other stuff. I don't need a lot of this other stuff in there. So I can create a layer mask. And there are a dozen different ways that you can create a layer mask. One of the easiest ways to create a layer mask, let me find something that has, like, maybe I want to cut this guy out and I'm going to shrink him down. I'm going to throw him in the settings somewhere. One of the easiest ways to create a layer mask is using the object selection tool. Okay, so over on your toolbar, that's underneath the magic wand. It's the fourth tool down on your toolbar. Okay, if I grab the object select tool, I know a lot of you are very familiar with this tool. You can just drag and draw with your mouse a box over that picture. And if you give it a second to kind of think, it will try. Oh, and it helps if you're selected on the right layer. That would help. Let me try that one more time. If you're selected on the right layer, it will try and grab what it sees as like the subject area. And sometimes it does a really good job for you. Sometimes it doesn't. It does see by color. Okay. Photoshop's not smart enough to always recognize like what something is, but it does have AI in it that try to read basic shapes and forms. So it's struggling with like his head wrap that he's got there, his scarf versus like his body. But that's done most of the cutting for me. Once I've done that, once I've clicked on that, you can come up here to the options bar. And again, this is just with the object selection tool. And you could just hit select and mask. I know a lot of you like to work in this pop-up. This is a pop-up that we've used before, and it's been around for a few years. You can come over here to view. I like to work in the view that is overlay, where everything is red that's not cut out. And in here, you can refine it. There are a lot of tools in here that will let you kind of make sure that your cutout actually looks right. Because if I look at my fellow over here up against the wall, it didn't know what was shadow and what was body. And he's got a very interesting body shape now that doesn't look very good. So I can easily use these tools in here. Okay, there's several over here on the left. The one that has like the little hand on it, if you have hair or fringe or anything that's very kind of like stringy, furry that you need to cut out, that is a very good tool for refining that. But I can come in here and I could just start to kind of erase around and pick back out the things that I need to pick out. And when I feel satisfied with what I do have, and there are a bunch of tools you can use to do this. You can jump out of the select and mask mode. That's not perfect, but for the sake of time, that'll work. Okay, a little more of the scarf there. But I can hit OK, and it's going to refine it. And all you have to do then is go down to the bottom of your layer panel, and the layer mask button is the one that looks like the Japanese flag. Okay, it's a white rectangle. It has a gray dot in the center. If you click it, it'll make that a mask for you. Okay, as long as you stay on the object selection tool, it's going to continue to do this where it tries to be smart and pick out the pieces and parts that it imagines are in the picture. So if that bothers you, just swap to something else. Anything that makes running ants, if you have running ants on the screen and then you hit that layer mask button, it's going to cut it out for you. Okay, and the way the layer mask works, it's down here. It's kind of hard to see. I'm going to open up my layer panel. Okay, the layer mask adds this extra little rectangle to your particular layer that you want. And it is a black and white rectangle. Okay, and the general concept with the black and white rectangle is pretty simple. If it's white, it's visible. If it's black, it's colored out. And this is a non-destructive type of thing. So I didn't actually delete anything in my photo. If I decide I want to bring back other things in my photo, they're still there and I can bring them back. I can use the paintbrush tool actually. So if I click on the paintbrush tool, down here at the very bottom of your screen, you've got your black and white. And if you hit the letter X as in xylophone, it'll flip-flop your foreground and background colors as you paint. But as long as you're directly clicked on that little black and white rectangle, it should have a little frame that pops up around it when you're clicked on it. You can go in here and very quickly paint out things that might have shown up that you don't want. You can refine your edges, and you can very easily bring stuff back that you've deleted that you decide you still want. Okay, all you got to do is use black and white. So like if I accidentally erase too much, I can swap to white, and I could just paint in here, and it'll start to bring back more of the photo without you actually destroying the photo. And you can adjust your landscapes and things a lot easier using those layer masks. Of course, the object selection is only one way to do it. You can do it a bunch of different ways. Like, let me try a different photo now just to kind of show you something else. So say I do want to use this building. Okay, this building is cut out of rock and it's pretty much a rectangular shape. Instead of me painstakingly trying to cut it out with the polygonal lasso tool or the magnetic lasso tool, which you can use if you want to, if that works best, I'm just going to use the rectangular marquee. Okay. And I'm going to start by cutting out something that's not perfect, but it's going to save me a lot of time. So when I draw the running ants around that, I can then just click the little Japanese flag down here. Okay. Also, again, Miss Jarek just did something dumb. Make sure that you are clicked on the actual layer you want to do anything to. But now that I have that, I can come in here. I can click on that black and white rectangle. And I could use the paintbrush just like I did on that figure that I was cutting out a second ago. So I can flip-flop between black and white. If I use black paints, it will kind of cut out the edges of things that I maybe don't want to keep for whatever reason. Okay. So I can easily cut something out like that. And if I mess up, I just hit X, I grab white, and I could easily paint it back in. And another nice thing about being able to do this is you can actually control the opacity too. The paintbrush still has all the paintbrush settings when you're working on the layer mask. You can come up here to the top and you can turn the hardness down so it has soft, fuzzy edges if you want to make it feel like it's blurred around the edges. So what I could do is turn that down a little bit, make my brush a little wider, and I could just create sort of a fuzzy edge so it feels less like I cut it out with a pair of scissors. Okay, you can also turn down the opacity and all sorts of other simple settings. But those are the basics to layer masking. And layer masking is very, very forgiving. Again, it's non-destructive. It doesn't destroy the photo. Okay, but basically it blocks out the items or shows items based on what you decide to color in or color out. Okay. The layer mask is always a little rectangle over here. You can actually have a gray layer mask as well, but most of the time they're going to be black or white. Okay, and you can create masks inside of masks, but they don't work the way that it seems like it would work. Okay, so if I want to do something else on, like if I want to create another type of layer mask that I can't do inside of this one black and white square on this one layer I have, okay, I have to create a new layer to make additional edits. So long story short, you cannot add more than one layer mask on a layer. Like I can technically, I can hit this little Japanese flag and it'll pop up, but it doesn't do what you think it does. Okay, but at any time, if you want to view in your layer mask what is originally there, if you right click on the black and white rectangle, you can hit disable layer mask and it'll just turn it off for a minute. Okay, and then you can right click and hit enable and turn it back on. You can also, if you decide that it's not worth you trying to fix it, you just want to start over, you can right click on the black and white rectangle and just delete the mask altogether. Okay, but those are some very basic masking things. I do recommend use the selected mask function. When you start to cut out tiny things, like say you do want to cut out, like let me find those camels. Where'd those camels go? I feel like I'm mostly talking to myself, but I want to make sure that you all feel okay with what you have to work on. So say I want to cut out these camels now. Okay. Photoshop may struggle a little bit because the color of the camels is pretty similar to the colors of the rocks in the background. But I can try and just draw a box with the object selection tool over it and just kind of see what happens. Actually, it was really good. And it actually saw the difference between the person and the camel on the one that has a rider. Okay, but again, you can always hit select and mask and you can easily kind of clean it up. There is a button up at the top that says refine hair. It will try to find the hair in a picture. Sometimes it struggles if things seem like they would be hair, but they're not. It kind of struggles with that. But if you have something that you're cutting out that could use that tool, click it and it'll do it for you automatically. There's also a select subject button where it tries to select what it sees on its own. But again, use these to your advantage. Don't just cut away at your photos forever without creating a layer mask. Okay, but what I want you to mostly work on today is once you've found your photos, start to bring them into Photoshop and lay them out the way that you want them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop talking for like 10 to 15 minutes. And I'm going to let you, if you haven't, because you were still working on your other project, try and find some reference images. If you do have them, go ahead and put them in Photoshop. And then I'm going to show you how to kind of color correct them to make sure that even though you've got different landscape photos, they feel like they're in the same place and they have similar lighting and similar colors going on. So they feel a little more natural. Okay. Cool. We feel all right. Anybody have any questions so far? All right. My most talkative class. Like I said, I like to go up to image and adjustments, and there are a lot of different things that you can use under here. A lot. So one of the most basic ones is levels. Okay. For some of you, this will be more helpful than others. If you have a landscape that has really heavy contrast, like mine, there are some deep shadows and there are some sunny spots in some of my photos, but there's not a lot of like big division between like super dark colors and super light colors. But you can come in and use your levels to adjust the amount of darks, whites, and midtones in your pictures. So if the lighting in general feels very different, like this picture I have over here on the left, the lighting is much harsher, like it's more distinct in this one than in my other two. I can start to play with these levels to adjust how dark all of the shadows look versus how light everything looks. And I can click on each one and individually adjust those levels just to help them start to feel a little bit more, I don't know, similar, like they're in the actual same location. And again, it just takes some tweaking to kind of play with it, but it'll immediately start to help overall. Now the color's still not right, but the general like shadows start to match a little bit more. I can also go to image. Underneath adjustments, you can play with the curves. Now, I know some of you like curves more than others, and some of you have more experience with curves than others. The idea with curves is pretty simple. Okay, you are adjusting the span of colors that are in your photograph to begin with. Okay, so here you have a histogram that has all of these different lines in it and a straight line running through it. You could take your mouse, which will turn into crosshairs like a little plus sign, and you could click on it. And you can start to literally bend this line so that it becomes a curve, hence its name. And you see my picture over there on the left as I start to kind of play with the curves. This is a really good way to edit photos. You can add multiple dots to it, and it'll really start to tweak the colors. It'll start to tweak kind of the saturation as well as just the shadows and things. It does take a lot of patience, and sometimes you mess it up. Like sometimes it just looks really bad. If you get to playing with the curves and it looks completely different from what you want it to look like, you can always hold down Alt by your spacebar. So Alt is on either side of your spacebar. And if you hold Alt down, you should be able to reset it, or you can obviously just hit cancel as well. Okay. So that's another option. Okay. Moving right along, let's talk about some other things. You can also play with hue and saturation. A lot of you, if you are going to use pictures, there's quite a few of you that I've seen that have pictures of space for your images or neon lights. If you have really bright, distinct types of colors, especially, hue and saturation can be good for you. But you can use hue and saturation to immediately change the color of things. So if you have one picture of mountains that are really bluish and another picture of mountains that are really gray, you can use the hue slider, which means color, and you can add a little bit of a tint to it so that those mountains start to look more similar. Okay, my particular picture, and you can always hold Alt down. Any of these pop-ups, if you hit Alt, the cancel will become reset. But my picture over here, this one looks a lot more orange than the other two. Okay, or just like a lot more sort of saturated. I can turn the saturation down and it'll immediately start to look a little bit more like this one over here on the right. And I can also start to play with it to get a little bit more of a reddish tone to it. And again, it'll start to match this one on the right a little bit better. So just play with it. Now, lightness and darkness, you probably don't want to mess with that. That basically just completely paints it white or completely paints it black. But again, just play with it. Every picture is going to be a little bit different. So stay in the adjustments area. There's tons of stuff in here. Okay, hue, saturation is color. You can play with color balance too. It's very similar to hue and saturation. It just has like a slightly different sort of format where you can play with sliders. Okay, underneath adjustments, there is a photo filter. I don't know how many of you will need this, but basically it creates an overlay on top. If you are using a photo that has like a distinct sort of historical look to it, like sepia tone, or something that feels kind of aged, you can add different things to it. If you are doing something that's underwater, I haven't particularly noticed anybody doing underwater stuff. There are some that will add that sort of coloring on top of your image too. Let's see what else would be useful. Threshold, gradient map, selective color. You can play with shadows and highlights. It's similar to levels, but I feel like levels is more effective. Okay, and all of these things are also over here on your properties panel. There's a little tab that says adjustments, and they're all the same things. Okay, there are some presets in here, but you can look and they're all listed: hue and saturation, curves, levels, and you can add them on top the same way. So those are some simple ways to adjust the general color. Now, several of you have already mentioned that you have pictures that are a little bit lacking in content. Okay, Photoshop does have a new generative AI feature in it that will help you build and construct images based on text that you type in. And it is very useful. It can go really wrong, but it can also work really well. Okay, here are my caveats for this assignment. Okay, you do still have to use 3 different photos that you construct with. I do not want the majority of your document to become AI. And part of the requirement for this document or this project is I am going to have you submit your PSD file so I can look at things. But if you do want to continue your picture a little bit, like let me come over here, let's see. Maybe I want to continue this photo right here. Maybe I decide, man, I really need just a little bit more on the right and a little bit more on the left. Okay, most of you probably have this bar down at the bottom of your screen that could be a little bit annoying. Right? If you actually hit the 3 dots, you can hide the bar at any time. You can always pull the bar back up to, where is that? View, aspects. I'll figure out where that is in a second, but you can open it back up. Oh, there it is. Yeah, contextual taskbar. It's underneath window near the very bottom. So if you do exit out of it and want it back, but essentially, if you want to use the AI, the only thing you have to do is create running ants somewhere to give it an idea of what you want. So you can cut something out and it will replace a background if you want it to. Or like in this instance, and this is where I feel like it will be more helpful to a few of you, if you wish your photo was just a little bit bigger, if you're on the same layer as your photo and you draw, say, a bounding box or some running ants around it that extends it a little bit, on this little bar down here, as soon as you turn the running ants on, you'll get a little button that says generative fill. Okay. And you can click it and it'll ask you to add on to the sides. There's also, again, like I said, a reset. So you can like move things around easily if you need to. And underneath the 3 little dots, you can pin the bar in a certain position. So if you hate that it moves around constantly, you can pin it to a certain place on the screen, which could be pretty helpful. Okay. So, you know what? I'm not going to add anything new to the scene. I'm just going to hit generate. And if you don't add extra text, it will just fill based on what it sees already in your image. So I can hit generate. And it's usually going to give you several different options that you can kind of choose from. Did I just mess that completely up? I did. Come on. All right. Let's say, okay, I might have gone a little bit too extreme. But you can type in anything and it will kind of like, let's try something else really quick. Let's try, maybe I want to replace this planet. So I could try like Saturn. It's not a planet, it's a moon. I'm aware. I'm sorry. And again, a lot of times it will work better if you just give it more detail than what I'm giving it right now. Okay. But it'll try to replace it. It'll try to put new things in there. Okay, so I can come up here and I could draw a box over on this side. And I don't know what I want to add over here. Maybe I want to add sky and birds. And you can hit generate. Now, I don't want this to be a predominant part of your project. And obviously, I'm not super good at describing like and telling it what I want to see. but it will give you some different options over here in the properties panel. You can scroll down and you could choose different variations of what it thinks you might want. Play with it a little bit. Okay, I don't want you to rely on it to create your entire piece. What we're not doing is typing in like all of the words for what your idea will be. But I do want you to consider if you need to add something that you just can't find, or if your photo is a little bit smaller than you need it to be, you can use that to extend it. And if you have issues with it, let me know. I'm happy to help you with it. Aside from that, okay, don't forget about your 3D forms. You do need to create your 3D forms in in some way. Okay. Now you don't have to necessarily draw them from scratch, but you do have to create them in your own way. I will mention to you too, because I know a lot of you are going to want a very different like look and style for your 3D forms. On Canvas, underneath the intro page, there are a bunch of videos here. Okay, so there are several different examples. I am in parentheses here. You should see some of the different things to give you an idea of what each video is. So like if you want to do one where your form has a reflection in it, where everything is reflecting the environment around it, kind of like this one in this purple picture right here, there's a video for that. Okay, there are some for just creating like different types of reflections based on what the shape or the sphere is. But you can click through, and each one of these, based on whatever it is that you kind of want to do, there are a few there that will give you some tips and tricks that will make it a little bit easier. But if there is something that you're trying to make and you just can't get it right, let me know. But what I would recommend is before you start to make the forms, ensure that you've got all the color editing done on your landscape and you feel like the landscape itself is set up and complete and feels right. Okay, and it should fill in the entire space. I know mine is far from done, but does anybody have any questions about the color correction stuff? Okay. We'll talk about a few more things that might be helpful next time, but just start by kind of laying stuff out first. And I know some of you work much faster in that way than others, and some of you have like a lot more that you need to cut out of your landscapes than others. Just make sure that you save often. Okay, and we'll just keep working on this through the end of today. You don't have to turn anything in today other than your sketches if you haven't turned them in already. Okay. And I will chat with you individually about your sketches and what you're kind of thinking at the beginning of next class. But I know several of you didn't have a chance to start coming up with ideas until today.